All right, today we're going to be tearing a motor out of a TTR50. We're going to tear the motor out. We've got a complete new motor that we're going to put in. So first thing you're going to do, two 10mm bolts that come out of the back of the motorcycle. You're going to take and pull those off, and then you'll take the seat and the fender all off together. Same thing with the front fender, the fuel tank. We've got two 10mm bolts in behind the panels here, and we've got a rubber strap that'll hold those on. We're going to remove that fuel tank. We got a fuel line hooked on the other side that will disconnect off of the back of the fuel tank, and that just pulls off of there. Obviously make sure that your fuel's in the off position and the fuel tank just pulls off there. Now we're going to go ahead and start disassembling parts off of this motor. The motor that we have has got the shifter not on it, so we're going to take this exhaust off, two 10mm bolts there. This is the header here. And just pull this side all the way off, and then we'll go to the other side and tear it apart. And also on the exhaust, we've got a mount clear in the back there. I'm not sure you'll be able to see that on the video, but it's like a 14mm holding that silencer on. This will come off all as one piece. So one manifold bolt off there, or nut there. We have a 14mm, you can see it there. Oops, excuse me, 12mm. And now we just have that other head bolt holding this on there. I like to hold that exhaust up because there's going to be quite a bit of weight on that header, especially as you loosen this last manifold bolt here. Sometimes the stud will come out of the head as well. I don't know if that will be the case here, but that's fine if that's the case. You just want to obviously put it back in the same position. All right, and the exhaust is off of there. Not a lot to these motors. Here's the other bolt there. We've got a skid plate we're going to take out off as well. Looks like a handful of 12mm bolts there. And kind of a tough position. You're not able to use a socket there. One right underneath the cylinder. Actually use a larger size in the back. I don't think that's factory, but all right, we have that one out. We've got a 13 in the back. Generally, these won't use 13, so this may be a bolt that they just picked up from the hardware store. Obviously, still metric. Got motor mount bolt there. We won't do that quite yet. We've got a couple more things we've got to take off first. Got your intake here, so we've got a hose going to that intake that connects onto that crankcase. So we've got to disassemble that. Last one on the other side. This kind of protects that starter. And there's the skid plate there. Get that hose we can remove. And we will pull it off of the motor side of it, because all this is just going to stay in place. Our new motor comes with this intake manifold there, so we've got an Allen bolt that we just have to pull on either side there. And again, we'll leave this carburetor hooked up. Coil, take the cap off of there. One bolt off of that manifold. I'm going to take you around to the other side here in a minute and just take off a handful of bolts over there that we're needing to. I'm going to loosen these engine mount bolts there. 12 millimeters. Some of these you have to go on the other side, use a wrench and hold those bolts like that one there. And we're not going to pull these bolts yet. Just loosen them so we're ready. There's sometimes a good amount of weight on these. And then we have one underneath here. I think it might be a 14. Right where that brake lever is, and I don't know that we need to pull that brake lever quite yet, or even if we do at all. Undone, undone. Starter wire will obviously have to be unhooked. But I'll take you around to the other side now and we'll look at that. Okay, we've got the couple motor mount bolts here. We took that one off. Here's your intake here. We're gonna go ahead and pull this front sprocket cover, because we will have to remove that chain. A couple 8 millimeter bolts. And that cover is off. And then to remove that sprocket, I'll get it to where you can see that there a little bit better. We have a snap ring. Remove that snap ring, and that sprocket will just pull off of there. Snap ring's off. Sprocket will just kind of walk itself off of there. There is some tension on there that we can loosen that chain to allow this to come off a little bit easier. But we're able just to pull it off like that there. Take that sprocket, get it up out of the way, because there will be a bolt and you won't be able to see that nut and bolt there underneath, behind the Kickstarter. But I'm gonna go ahead and pull the gear shifter off. We can do that at this time. And also the other Allen for that intake up here. That carburetor may just drop right down onto that motor, but we can just hold that out of the way. There's a spacer that's in between that carburetor and that manifold that just got to keep an eye on, make sure that goes to the right spot. We'll go ahead and pull these top bolts off of here. Those are 12 millimeter. That's kind of a motor mount. It also does a little bit more than that. This motor mount here up top will actually drop that motor down by loosening that up, so we won't do that quite yet. I'm gonna go ahead and get on that back mount, which is a 14, and that's behind that Kickstarter. It's really kind of difficult to get to. even putting that kickstarter down, or kickstand down, it's gonna be hard to get to, but I might be able to push the brake lever down over here. We're gonna have to take that brake lever off. But the nut's off right now. And in order to pull this bolt out, I'm gonna go ahead and just pull that brake lever so we can pull this bottom mount out. I'm gonna take a block, set it underneath, and that's not quite gonna be tall enough, but we'll just kind of let that motor drop down on top of there. We could pull this top mount here. There's still gonna be two holding it on, two bolts, so it's not gonna drop down completely. We've got a stator here. Wires are coming out, and it's in behind here. It looks like it's possibly zip tied, so I'm gonna grab a 10mm socket. Actually, that's not the one I needed to pull. Battery cover here. And now we can get to these wires. Use a pair of side snips, cut the zip tie. Stator wires look like they go all the way back. Where the CDI box is. So right behind the CDI box, those stator wires will go into the actual harness. Just kind of got to fish them out of there. And then there is one wire. It's a 2-pin. So we got a 2-pin and a 4-pin connector, and both of those are going to have to come out to pull this motor. Regular rectifier, I'm just going to pull that connector so we can get it out of there easier. And then fish that around there. Through here underneath behind the battery connectors there, and then we've got those stator wires. We've got another 2-pin connector. Attaches to the wire harness right behind the battery. That one's going to come out as well. That's possibly a gear position sensor, maybe a kickstand. I'm not sure on that one. Okay, then we've got, let's see, this back bolt we could pull out now. That'll drop that motor down onto this block. And I might actually set a little bit bigger block underneath it. Now this motor mount that I just pulled there is right behind the air box. We've got one more waiting on that brake lever to get removed. Go ahead and pull that brake lever. Obviously spring loaded. Looks like we may end up having to pull that foot peg. So there's 2 more 13mm bolts, or at least just loosening them up. So we can drop it, or pull this or this rear brake pedal down. All we need to do is get that brake pedal down far enough to slide that bolt out of there. And we've got everything loose enough now to where that might be the case. Gonna have to lift up a little bit, take that pressure off that motor. This motor mount here doesn't look like we're gonna be quite down far enough with that brake lever. If we loosen up this back here, I wonder if we can drop that lever down far enough. What we could do too is pull this pin out, which is maybe what we'll end up doing if we can't get it out here. Yep, we got it out there. So now this motor will come out. That motor's out, or that motor mounts is out. I'm gonna go to the other side now. Okay, foot pegs are actually attached to the motor, so wouldn't probably have to pull them now, but okay, foot pegs are dropped down. We have a starter wire that we did actually, that was one of the wires that we pulled off when we were pulling that stator wire off. So that motor then is out. Grab the other motor. Two top mount bolts, we'll get those ready to go in. What I'll do is slide it into place here. If you have a second person there, you can just hold these right up there essentially just set that into place, but okay, that motor mount is through. I'll go ahead and do this bottom one. Move that block so I can push down on the motor, and it'll just pivot on that top mount. Slide that in there, kind of push it down to get around that brake lever. And now that will hold everything there. Go ahead and put this nut on here. Bolt's probably not gonna slide out, but there's a spacer there that we have on our carburetor. And we've got a ripped O-ring, which isn't a good thing. So we'll go ahead and replace that O-ring before we put that carburetor completely back on. Spark plug cap, that's easy enough. Slide that on there. We've got our hose there going to the air box, that's on. Foot peg bolts. We'll do those at some point. This other motor mount bolt we've got, we'll slide in here. Kind of behind that air box. The motor that we got has a zip tie on these wires that will run up. And the starter has its own separate zip tie. And those run down through some of these, like the drain plug area here. We'll run it up alongside of behind the stator cover. And again, that one goes in behind the starter, or in front of the starter, I guess, behind those wires. What I meant to say. Same way with those other wires. Hook the starter wire up. And in front of the regulator rectifier, stick these wires through into that CDI box compartment. And then we can hook those up. One 4-pin connector, one 2-pin connector. And then we'll put that CDI box back into place. plug the regulator rectifier back in. Now that battery cover could actually go on. We won't do that quite yet. I'm gonna put the counter shaft sprocket back on with the circlip here. I guess it came with a new sprocket. Not new, but a different one. So I'm gonna see if we can see which one's better. We'll put the better one on there. They're about the same. Same number of teeth. Remember, this was really tight, so we might not be able to put this counter shaft sprocket on until we loosen that rear axle. Gonna go ahead and tighten this motor mount up. We've got all the motor mounts on. This top mount part of it, we need to put those bolts in. Larger washer on this motor mount. Here we'll take impact, hold this bolt on this side, 14 millimeter. Tighten those up. Can't put this cover back on yet until we put that countershaft sprocket on there. So I will put these foot pegs up. And we've got the skid plate that'll go on at some point. I'm gonna finish tightening up all these motor mount bolts. That way I know for sure that they're finished. Up top are 12 millimeters. And we've got one right here. We'll tighten from the other side. We'll tighten the nut on the other side. And then one behind the airbox here. Battery cover, 2 10 millimeters. All right, I took and cleaned this skid plate off here. Got two 12 millimeter bolts up front. One on this side. Obviously, putting a motor in like this, you're gonna wanna check oil and I like to change spark plug minor stuff like that. Make sure that it's where it needs to be before you start running it. Also, I like to adjust valves. Check that video, we've done that in a different video. So make sure these foot peg bolts are on tight. All three motor mount bolts are tight, they're ready to go. Put the shifter on. Again, check oil. And I've showed you in another video how to adjust valves. Showed you in another video how to check oil or change oil. So take a look at those if you need help with that. Loosening the chain now so we can get this countershaft sprocket on. Just gonna go ahead and loosen these up, both the same amount, but going to need to loosen this up quite a bit to get that front sprocket on. Take that and slam this wheel forward. Get that forward enough. Might be able to get this countershaft sprocket on. Use a little bit more. A little tricky lining up these splines. All right. Got it on there, put the circlip on. And we can go ahead and put that cover. I like to make sure once I get that circlip on there, I like to kind of tap on it just slightly, make sure it fell into place. I have this cover that will slide on. Okay, go ahead and tighten up that chain. Make sure when you're tightening up this chain, to tighten it up, to tighten up the chain on this TTR50, you loosen your axle nut here just slightly, and that's a 17 millimeter. We've got a 12 millimeter lock nut here and a 10 millimeter lock nut. Excuse me, a 12 millimeter adjusting nut and then a 10 millimeter locking nut. So you want to make sure they're both the same. What I do is there's about an inch adjustment up and down, 1.5 inches. It's about where you need to be. In this case, it's 1, 2, 3, slightly over the third large mark. And same way with this side here. And that's about where you need to be. So then what I do is I like to, as long as both sides are in the same spot, I lock down my axle nut here, the larger one, and then I'll put these adjusters in the same spot, or put these adjusters and lock them down with the lock nut. So I like to tighten up the adjuster bolts so they're sitting right on the swing arm if they're not already. That one's sitting right on there, and then take your lock nut here, tighten it down. If you did that, make sure they're both, just double check, make sure they're both equal. You don't want one side tighter than the other one. So, all right, we'll put some oil in there, change the spark plug, change this O-ring like I said, and then we'll put these 2 Allen bolts back in there. Fuel tank back on, seat and fenders back on, and that is the motor on a TTR50.